Have you ever been so tired that your body simply quit on you, right in the middle of the one moment you could not afford to fall apart? Marcus Raid knew that feeling. He knew it the way a man knows the weight of his own shadow. And what happened next, in a fluorescent, lit conference room on the fourth floor of a building he had grown to dread, would change the entire direction of his life. But not in the way you might expect. Not through a promotion. Not through some grand gesture. Through something so small, so quiet, that most people would have missed it entirely. 5 words from a woman he barely knew. 5 words that broke him open. And then rebuilt him. Marcus had worked at Holden and Kirsch for 11 years. 11 years of showing up before the sun rose and driving home after it had already set. He was a senior project coordinator, which sounded important on paper, but in practice meant he was the man everyone called when something went wrong. And something was always going wrong. His phone buzzed before his alarm clock. His inbox filled faster than he could empty it. Every deadline felt like a closing door, and he was always running, always reaching, always just barely making it through before it slammed shut. The pressure had been building for months. Not suddenly, not like a storm that announces itself with thunder. More like water rising slowly in a sealed room. Inch by inch, silent, relentless. He could feel it at his ankles first, then his knees, then his chest. And still he kept working. Still he kept smiling in the hallway, nodding in meetings, telling everyone he was fine. Because that is what men like Marcus did. They carried. They endured. They did not ask for help. He had a small apartment on the east side of town. Nothing fancy. A couch that sagged in the middle, a kitchen window that faced a brick wall, and a coffee maker that had become his most trusted companion. He ate most of his meals standing up. He could not remember the last time he had sat at a table and tasted his food. Really tasted it. The kind of eating where you notice the warmth of the bread, or the way butter melts against your tongue. That kind of simple pleasure had become a luxury he could not afford. Not because of money. Because of time. Because every minute that was not spent working felt stolen, and the guilt followed him even into sleep. His boss was a woman named Catherine Ellison. She had been promoted to division director 3 years ago, and from the very first day, she carried herself with a kind of calm authority that made people straighten their posture when she entered a room. She was not cold exactly, but she was precise, professional. She spoke in clear, measured sentences. She never lingered after meetings to chat about the weather or weekend plans. She never asked personal questions. And in return, no one asked her any either. There was a glass wall between Catherine and the rest of the team. You could see through it, but you could not touch through it. Marcus respected her. He had no reason not to. She was fair in her expectations and consistent in her feedback. But in 11 years of working in the same building and 3 years of reporting directly to her, Marcus could not recall a single conversation that had lasted longer than what the task required. She was his boss. He was her employee. That was the entire shape of their relationship, functional, efficient, and utterly hollow. He did not know if she had children. He did not know where she was from. He did not know what she did on Sundays, or whether she preferred coffee or tea, or whether she had ever felt the kind of tiredness that lives in your bones. And he had never thought to wonder, because the workplace had taught him that wondering about such things was unnecessary. You show up. You perform. You go home. You repeat. That was the contract, unspoken but binding. The trouble had started 6 months before that meeting. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. She still lived alone in the house where Marcus had grown up, a small yellow house with a rose garden she could no longer tend. At first, the signs had been small. She would call him twice in one evening and not remember the first call. She would leave the stove on. She would stand in the grocery store aisle holding a list she could no longer read in her own handwriting. Marcus began driving to her house every night after work. He would cook for her, check the locks, set out her morning medication in little plastic cups labeled with the days of the week. He would sit with her while she watched television, and sometimes she would look at him with a flicker of confusion, as if she was trying to place his face. Those moments gutted him, quietly. Completely. He told no one at work, not a single soul. He did not want pity. He did not want to be seen as distracted or unreliable, so he absorbed it. He folded the grief into himself like a man tucking a letter into his coat pocket, always carrying it, never showing it. The sleep started slipping away first. He would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, his mind racing through tomorrow's tasks and yesterday's failures. 2 hours of rest became a good night. Some nights he got nothing at all. He would arrive at the office with his eyes burning and his hands unsteady, pour black coffee down his throat like medicine, and push through. His body began to ache in ways he had never experienced. His lower back, his temples, a dull pressure behind his eyes that never fully went away. He lost weight without trying. His shirts hung looser. His belt needed a new hole. But still he showed up. Still he performed. Because that was the contract. The meeting was on a Thursday, late October. The kind of gray autumn day where the sky looks like a ceiling and the air smells like damp leaves and old rain. It was a quarterly review session, the kind that stretched for hours and covered every department's numbers in excruciating detail. Marcus had been dreading it all week. Not because he was unprepared. He had his reports. He had his slides. He had rehearsed his section until the words felt mechanical in his mouth. No, he dreaded it because he knew what 4 hours in a warm, dimly lit conference room would do to a body that had not properly slept in weeks. The room was on the 4th floor. Long table. 12 chairs. A projector humming softly against the far wall. The blinds were half drawn, letting in just enough gray light to make everything feel muted and heavy. People filtered in with their laptops and their water bottles and their polite nods. Marcus sat near the middle of the table. Catherine sat to his left. She smelled faintly of lavender and paper. He noticed that. He did not know why. The meeting began. The first presenter spoke about third quarter revenue. Then someone from marketing talked about engagement metrics. The words blurred together like highway signs seen from a speeding car. Marcus blinked. He blinked again. His eyelids felt like they were lined with sand. He pressed his pen harder against his notepad, trying to anchor himself to the moment. He shifted in his chair. He took a sip of water. He bit the inside of his cheek. But the warmth of the room wrapped around him like a blanket, and the low drone of voices became a kind of lullaby he could not resist. The pen slipped from his fingers. His head dipped once, twice, and then, without permission, without warning, his body simply surrendered. He woke to the sensation of warmth beneath his cheek, something solid but soft, a shoulder. His eyes flew open and his heart slammed against his ribs like a fist. He was leaning against Catherine. His head rested on her shoulder. He could feel the fabric of her blazer against his skin, could smell the lavender more clearly now, mixed with something else, lotion, maybe, or the faint scent of morning tea still clinging to her clothes. Horror flooded through him like ice water. He jerked upright so fast that his chair scraped against the floor, and 2 people across the table glanced over. His face burned. His hands trembled. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain. But the words tangled in his throat like knotted rope. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, or at least he imagined he could. His pulse hammered in his ears. He had just fallen asleep on his boss. On his boss's shoulder. In the middle of a quarterly review. In front of everyone. His career flashed before his eyes, not the highlights, but the ending. The write-up, the awkward conversation with HR, the slow, humiliating unraveling of everything he had worked to build. He turned to Catherine, his lips parted, his eyes wide with shame, and what he saw on her face stopped him cold. She was not angry. She was not disgusted. She was not even surprised. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was soft, unhurried, almost tender. The glass wall was gone. And then she spoke, quietly, so quietly that no one else at the table could hear. You can sleep if you want. 4 words, 5. If you count the pause she left between sleep and F, the way she let the silence hold the meaning before the words caught up. Marcus stared at her. He could not move. He could not breathe. Because in that moment, something inside him cracked, not like something breaking, but like something thawing. Like ice on a river in early spring, giving way to the current that had been moving beneath it all along. She did not ask why he was tired. She did not lecture him about professionalism. She did not glance around to see if anyone was watching. She simply gave him permission. Permission to be human, permission to be fragile, permission to stop performing, even for a moment. And Marcus, who had not cried in front of another person in over 20 years, felt his eyes fill with tears. He blinked them back. He pressed his lips together. He nodded once, very slightly, and looked down at his hands. He did not sleep again during that meeting, but something inside him had already begun to rest. The days that followed were different. Not dramatically, not in the ways that make for loud stories, but in the quiet ways that matter most. Marcus could not stop thinking about what Catherine had said. Not just the words, but the way she had said them. The steadiness in her voice. The absence of judgment. He had spent 11 years building walls around himself at work, brick by brick, and she had walked right through them with a single sentence. He found himself looking at her differently in meetings, noticing things he had never noticed before. The way she paused before answering a question, as if she was genuinely considering it. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands, like she was warming herself from the inside. The way her eyes softened when someone on the team admitted they were struggling with a deadline. She was paying attention. She had always been paying attention. He just had never looked closely enough to see it. A week after the meeting, Catherine stopped by his desk. It was late afternoon. The office was thinning out. She stood beside his chair and asked, simply, "How are you really doing, Marcus?" And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he told the truth. He told her about his mother, about the dementia, about the nights spent driving across town to check on her, about the medication cups and the forgotten phone calls and the way she sometimes looked at him like he was a stranger wearing her son's face. He told her about the insomnia, about the weight loss, about the feeling of drowning while standing perfectly still. Catherine listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer quick solutions. She pulled a chair beside him, sat down, and listened the way you listen to rain, patiently, completely, without expecting it to stop. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You have been carrying this alone." It was not a question. It was a recognition. And it mattered more than any advice she could have given. Something shifted between them after that conversation. Not romantically, though the warmth was real and deep. It was something rarer. It was genuine respect between two people who had finally allowed themselves to be seen. Catherine began checking in on Marcus regularly, not in a supervisory way, in a human way. She would stop by his desk with a cup of tea. She would ask about Eleanor by name. She told Marcus about her own father, who had passed from Alzheimer's 7 years earlier. She told him about the guilt she still carried, the feeling that she should have visited more, should have noticed sooner, should have held his hand longer on that last afternoon. She told him these things quietly, privately, in the soft minutes between meetings when the office felt almost gentle. And Marcus listened the way she had listened to him. With his whole heart, she also did something practical. She adjusted his workload. Not dramatically. Not in a way that drew attention, but enough to give him breathing room. She approved a flexible schedule that allowed him to leave early twice a week to be with his mother. She told him, firmly but gently, that asking for help was not weakness. It was courage. And Marcus, who had spent his entire adult life believing that strength meant silence, began to wonder if she was right. The changes did not stop at the office. Marcus began sleeping again. Not perfectly. Not every night. But enough. The iron grip of insomnia loosened, slowly, like fingers unclenching after years of holding on too tight. He started eating meals at the table. He started tasting his food again. The warmth of soup on a cold evening, the sweetness of an apple sliced thin, the comfort of bread fresh from the oven. He called an old friend he had not spoken to in 2 years. They met for coffee. They talked about nothing important, and it felt like everything. He hired a part, time caregiver for Eleanor, a kind woman named Doris who sang gospel hymns while she cooked, and who called Marcus every evening to tell him his mother had eaten well and slept soundly. He began to understand something he had never allowed himself to believe, that he did not have to do everything alone. That needing support was not a flaw in his character. It was a feature of being human, and he began to look at leadership differently. Catherine had shown him what it meant to lead, not with authority, not with distance, but with attention, with presence, with the willingness to see another person's pain and respond not with policy, but with compassion. He carried that lesson forward. In meetings, he began noticing when a colleague looked worn down. He would ask quietly, genuinely, "Are you okay?" And he meant it. He was becoming the kind of man that Catherine's kindness had made possible. Years later, Marcus would look back at that Thursday in late October and marvel at how small the moment had been. A head on a shoulder, a whispered sentence, 5 words spoken so softly they barely disturbed the air, and yet those 5 words had been a doorway. He had walked through it exhausted, ashamed, and alone, and on the other side, he found something he had forgotten existed. Belonging, not the kind that comes from a job title or a nameplate on a desk. The kind that comes from being known, from being seen in your most vulnerable moment and met not with judgment, but with grace. Catherine retired 2 years after that meeting. On her last day, Marcus stood in her office doorway with a small wrapped box. Inside was a lavender candle. She looked at it and then looked at him, and her eyes glistened. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything," he told her. And he did. He remembered the weight of his head on her shoulder. He remembered the warmth of her blazer. He remembered the way her voice had sounded, steady and kind and sure. He remembered the moment he stopped pretending. And he remembered the woman who made it safe for him to stop. Some people change your life with grand declarations or dramatic gestures. But the truest transformations happen in whispers. In the gentle courage of a woman who saw a tired man and chose compassion over protocol. In the quiet surrender of a man who finally let himself be held, even if only by 5 small words, "You can sleep if you want," and everything changed.